this debate is about a lot of things. It's about the need to retrofit UK homes to improve their fuel efficiency. It's about training the future workforce. It's about the consumer protection landscape. But it is also about the government taking responsibility for policy failures. But most importantly, this is about people. Therefore, before I cover the issues with ECO4 and the wider consumer protection landscape, I want to set out the experience of just one of my constituents called Jackie. Now, she and her husband live in a gable-end cottage. They've worked hard and done well and are meant to be enjoying their retirement. However, they are not, because it all started to go wrong just over a year ago when they filled in a small quiz about rural homeowners without central heating on the Energy Advice Helpline website. They did this for curiosity. They were contacted by a representative by phone and email very quickly and found themselves put into a pipeline for works to be carried out. And they have described that period to my team as being dizzying and feeling under pressure. They had checked that the Energy Advice Helpline seemed to be a genuine not-for-profit advice service, but had not been advised that the project had been given to a company called Central ECO Solutions. And in fact, now, some 12 months later, we have just found out that it was a further middle company, a surveyor based in Leeds, who until yesterday my constituents had never spoken to. He described the workflow as the Energy Advice Helpline advisor supplying work to him, and he then supplies work to installers. The work was carried out hurriedly in 3 weeks at the end of July and start of August last year. And alarmed at the poor quality of work being done in their property, Jackie and her husband started questioning the contractors about who was employing them and what instructions they had been given. It was only at this stage that they found out that Central ECO Solutions were involved. There was no project management, no contract, no design proposals, and when they asked for technical surveys, these were carried out by someone who was not a surveyor. Problems became obvious with the works immediately. No care was taken with the preparation. Floors were taken up and cupboards removed without notice. They described bespoke bookcases being ripped out with a crowbar, and promises of them being replaced transpired to be completely false. Insulation and plastering had to be redone 3 times. The team attempted to insulate around a radiator until stopped. They did manage to insulate over a double socket, making it unusable, and one insulation wall was put in at a very non-vertical angle. A joiner was sent to repair the woodwork, but he was only instructed to use MDF in place of pre-existing solid wood and clearly didn't have the skill set to do the job in hand. But Sir John, these are just the snags. The air source heat pump was originally installed on the outside of the gable wall, causing such bad noise and vibration in 2 bedrooms that they became unusable. At the time, Jackie investigated and found it had been bolted directly to the wall, whereas others they had seen were bedded on insulation. When she suggested this as a remedy, the heat pump was removed and placed apart from the building, but leaving pipework running at waist height over the pathway running to the garden. And those snags, most of them have still not been resolved. There are uncovered pipes, ruined woodwork, excess pipes creating energy waste, and a slanting kitchen wall. And obviously my constituents have gone through a terrible year dealing with this, chasing Central ECO Solutions for the work to be finished properly, trying to find some sort of guarantee scheme, making complaints, escalating those complaints with no clear route for doing so. And they are not alone, Sir John. I'm telling Jackie's story, but there are many others in North East Fife and around the country. This is not even just a problem with one installation company, because I have cases with others, and I've been contacted by people all around Great Britain since my debate went onto the order paper, naming different companies who have ruined their homes and left. This is a government problem which must be solved, and I've questioned the Minister in the House previously, and I think she knows this because she made an announcement in January this year that she would review the consumer protections landscape, particularly in relation to solid wall insulations under ECO4. But I have, however, had sight of a letter sent by our team in response to a complaint by a company out with North East Fife. And I was disappointed this letter makes it clear as the government does not directly fund ECO4, it does not get involved in the private and contractual decisions between the parties involved. And I think that somewhat misses the point. It may not be taxpayer funded, but ECO4 is a government-backed scheme. And for consumers, that is the same thing. That gives the scheme a stamp of government approval. The government surely wouldn't and shouldn't be backing something that allows traders to carry out unreliable and unsuitable work on somebody's property. The government wouldn't be backing something unless they were really sure of what it was, right? And in any case, Sir John, in some ways this is taxpayer funded. It is funded by a government-backed levy put on energy customers' bills. Just because it doesn't go through the Treasury's coffers doesn't mean that there isn't a public interest in getting this use of public funds right. Now, I'm happy to go on the record to say that I support eco schemes. Upgrading properties so they are energy efficient is incredibly important. Our constituents need this to save money on their bills, and in the face of a climate crisis, energy efficiency is a must-have. But as I said, Sir John, we need to get this right, not just so that there's faith in the schemes, although that is vitally important, but so that works under the schemes don't end up costing people even more in lost energy costs. And it is clear that some things are going badly wrong under the eco schemes as things stand. And I think the government need to address these for the remainder of properties who might have upgrades under ECO4 and for future iterations of the scheme. Firstly, there's a complete lack of transparency in how households are driven to the scheme, and as far as I can tell, no regulation either. I've talked about Jackie and how they felt railroaded from wondering if they'd been entitled to anything for upgrades to their home being pulled apart. But she is not a vulnerable person, and indeed thinks that the company she dealt with was totally unprepared for being challenged over the what of what was happening. On the other hand, another of my constituents who's had a terrible outcome under the scheme have described themselves as being vulnerable and feels that the system was set up to target people like them. So, John, I was surprised as my team and I have got further into these cases that more MPs aren't shouting out about this, because clearly it isn't just limited to either one company or North East Fife. But when I spoke to Fuel Poverty Action this week, they told me that what they were seeing was only the most determined victims are complaining. The rest are highly vulnerable people, and what I'm seeing is that if companies are offering to pay any compensation at all after months of fighting, which usually won't cover the costs of the remedial works anyway, it is with the condition that all complaints are withdrawn. And so therefore I can't help but wonder how many people have felt that they had to accept and now are not in a position to tell us about their experiences. Secondly, the funding model and the incentives placed in ECO4 place incentives on companies to upgrade rural homes, as my honourable friend referred to. Now, I understand the logic of that. Rural homes, as he said, tend to be a lot older and a lot less uniform than urban ones. So ideally, you would want not only a proper survey to be done, but for it to be carried out by a specialist retrofit coordinator. But the fact of the matter is we don't have anywhere near enough. Data supplied by Trustmark indicates that while over 2,000 individuals have completed the retrofit coordinator qualification, just 612 are registered with the quality mark and only 230 are actively lodging work in the data warehouse. Of the 230 active coordinators, around 30% are lodging the majority of these projects. That's about 66 specialists overseeing the vast majority of retrofit works. Clearly, we need more. This is a skills shortage that the government needs to worry about. According to the organisation Ashton, the UK will need up to 50,000 retrofit coordinators in coming years if we're going to reach our goals of making homes energy efficient. But in the meantime, I have to ask what requirements there are for works to be properly overseen by a specialist. Do contractors have to employ one and risk cutting into their margins? Are there requirements for the coordinators to actually visit a property, provide plans, speak with the owners or review works as they go? I'm wondering if the mysterious middleman I mentioned earlier was a retrofit coordinator. It's just not clear, and it's clear that none of these steps took place in that case. And similarly, the short-term nature of the scheme means we're not just skilling up the workforce, the plasterers, electricians, plumbers, that we need to do these works. ECO4 is the longest iteration of the schemes, which has been running for almost 4 years. But it is due to close next spring, and we still don't know what will replace it. Short schemes with short notice changes don't allow for businesses to invest in training or properly plan for the future. And even the best intentioned companies and tradespeople, that isn't commercially viable. And this is all underlined in the recent Energy Security and Net Zero Select Committee report through evidence from across the sector. What the industry needs is a 10-year plan so that they can invest in upskilling, take on apprenticeships, knowing that there will be work for them after their training, and really be prepared to take on the challenges of making our homes future-proof. And finally, Sir John, on ECO4, I just want to speak a little about the wider consumer protection landscape. There desperately needs to be some clarity over how works are certified and payment made. Again, these aren't just individual contractual disputes. The fact is that Ofgem is administering the scheme tells a very different story. Now, as I understand it, to get paid, an installer needs to register the works with Trustmark, providing photos, EPC ratings and so on. This is then validated before Ofgem releases funds. I have to ask, considering the hundreds if not thousands of homes being damaged around the country, what precise validation is happening? Is money being released for these ruined homes? What requirements are there on traders, not just to say, sure, we installed a heat pump, but to actually prove they've put a home back to the way it was? And I suppose also, where else is the money going to in that supply line of referrals I talked about earlier? Who is getting paid, by whom and for what? Sir John, I've talked a lot about ECO4, but I want to touch briefly on the wider consumer protection landscape, because of course now things have gone wrong. This is where my constituents and so many others are finding themselves battling. And I don't think it's controversial to say that it's a bit of a mess. The CMA confirmed this in their 2023 report on consumer protection in the green heating and insulation sector. This was reiterated by Citizens Advice in their Hitting a Wall report last year, and again by the DESNZ Select Committee in their report on retrofitting homes for net zero this spring. And indeed, I am aware, and I'm sure the Minister will reference it, that the Government is currently considering responses to a consultation on requiring the microgeneration certification scheme to be the sole certification scheme for clean heat installations. But having seen constituents and my caseworkers on their behalf battle through a maze of different accreditation and oversight bodies to try and find someone to take responsibility of these work, a single body does seem incredibly sensible. But I do have some remaining questions. How would this one body sit along Trustmark and Ofgem? Does it replace Trustmark? In which case, how do we know it would be better equipped for accrediting and overseeing retrofit contractors? Will it solve the problem of traders being able to say they're accredited and showing they're accredited when complaints have already started coming in? And at the moment, it's far too easy to chop and change logos or to continue displaying a logo that you shouldn't be able to. How do we make this new single body sufficiently powerful and reactive so that it can be trusted by consumers? One conversation I've had with policy specialists recently was a suggestion that local authorities could be trusted to keep a list of accredited local traders. And I had to tell them that some already do. And indeed, in North East Fife, a contractor just told constituents that they weren't displayed yet due to a delay in the application process. And I think that's very believable when you know how stretched local government is. What happens to consumers when their homes are left ruined, works poorly carried out, and the companies either have lied about being certified or have now dissolved and vanished? And what will happen to people stuck in the original system where their works were carried out under the current failing scheme, where people are being pushed from pillar to post with no end point in sight? Sir John, these are all the experiences of my constituents and so many others. And to keep fighting for someone to be on their side is breaking them. Where is their solution? Failures in consumer protection clearly go beyond the ECO4 scheme, but there are particular problems for consumers funded via ECO4, and because so many people, often vulnerable, are being pushed into having work done, and the nature of the schemes increases the chances of being allocated an unskilled or rogue trader. Some of the people I've spoken to in the run-up today have said this is a scandal that no one takes responsibility for, and they are very concerned about speaking out about it. I hope that the Minister is going to address some of my concerns this morning. Thank you.